If you like what I do, consider joining my channel or donating to my coffee. Links in the description.
C Tier Part 1.
Awita, Journey of Hope. Awita is from a village afflicted and has traveled abroad to find a cure. My Awita synopsis is so short and dismissive because the game is so short and dismissive of its own plot. The setup is never mentioned again or referenced beyond the first screen, and I really don't know what you're doing in Awita. The game looks nice and has great animations, but they're asset flips, so it feels hollow praising the dev for the game's nice presentation. When it comes to uniqueness, Awita brings nothing to the table. It's not a bad game, and Awita feels great to move and run around with, but you're really not gonna get too much from this experience. And I guess that's my criticism for this game. There's just not enough here to create a great or memorable experience. I'll preface this by saying I played the game at launch and have heard the game's received a bunch of updates, so take my criticism with a grain of salt. When I played Awita, the game was so empty. There were so many screens, maybe half, that just didn't have anything in them. No enemies, no hazards, no platforming. You just ran and ran and ran. And like I mentioned earlier, the game's setup and plot gets dropped almost immediately, and the game's replacement plot makes no sense. And neither does its abrupt ending that came out of nowhere and satisfied me in no way. I cannot say this game is completely without merit, as combat is simple and clean, but there's just not a lot to this game, a game that can be completed in just a couple of hours. Redo. Redo is a game about a girl trying to find another human in a dystopian world overrun by biomachines. She hears a voice in her head telling her to go to the church, and our adventure begins. Redo is a guilty pleasure of mine. I know I have this game ranked kinda low on the tier list, but that's because I feel your average MV enjoyer wouldn't really dig it. As for me, I think Redo is incredible. It's so thick with atmosphere, and it has DIY game dev passion pouring out of its every pixel. It's not perfect, but the world it creates and the tone it exudes is captivating. Plus, I like the combat. It's survival horror-esque that feels clunky, but with intent. Redo's unique element comes in its poise system. Depleted enemies poise, and you can stun them. Prior to Redo, there were no official poise meters in any Metroidvanias, at least not that I can think of. Many games let you stun or interrupt enemies with precise attack timing or with certain weapons, and Hollow Knight would let you stagger enemies after so many hits, but Hollow Knight kept its poise values hidden. Redo was the first to bring a poise meter to the genre, represented by a numerical value as opposed to an actual meter, and thus made breaking enemy poise an integral part of combat. My biggest criticism for Redo is its true ending. To get it, you have to replay the game on hard, which is, as you'd imagine, hard. But hard mode also remixes where you get weapons and upgrades as well as enemy placement, and the game's pretty short, so replaying it isn't too bad. But the new endings kinda suck, so if you're replaying specifically to get the better endings, you're gonna be disappointed. Dandara, Trials of Fear. The world of Salt hangs on the brink of collapse. The citizens, once free spirits, now stand oppressed and isolated. But not all is lost, for out of this ether of fear arises a heroine, a ray of hope. Her name is Dandara. Dandara is a really cool MV that I just didn't dig. I just wasn't a fan of its controls, but I'll get to that in a moment. Generally, there's a lot to like about Dandara. Its visuals are intriguing, its music is fantastic, and the game's abstractness is interesting. As for uniqueness, it's Dandara's controls. You don't walk or run in Dandara, nor do you jump around like a traditional platformer. Instead, Dandara clings to surfaces with salt on them, and she gets to these surfaces by jumping, but it feels less like jumping and more like shooting yourself off of a wall, like how you push yourself off of a pool's wall while swimming. Watching Dandara leap from surface to surface is a lot of fun and can be done quickly, leading to her looking like a blur when in the right hands. This brings me to my criticism. I hate this game. Jumping from surface to surface sucks, at least to me. And because there's no gravity in this world, you'll be flipping the screen and needing to reorient yourself often. And the in-game map doesn't orient with you, so you'll need to do some mental gymnastics if you want to read the map correctly. And the level design comes with a lot of one-way streets, which I absolutely hate in MVs. A one-way street here and there isn't so bad, but when the crux of your design leans heavily into one-way streets and has an unorthodox movement system, it's just too much. I beat it back in the day, but I haven't touched it since the Trials of Fear update, and I'm not really tempted to check it out. Venture to the Vile. Dive into the strange town of Rainybrook, taken over by the Vile. Fight your way through treacherous terrains and defeat creatures to absorb their powers. Will you save the town and find your missing friend Ella? Or will you give in to the monster you've become? Venture to the Vile just didn't hit for me. Granted, I only played the game at launch, so some of the criticisms I'm going to get into may have been patched since then. But generally speaking, the game has a pretty good atmosphere. I never truly understood why all the characters wore animal masks, as I don't think it was ever explained. The whole mask thing just felt like a weird way to get people's attention and to get them to start theorizing online, and I always find that kinda lame. As far as uniqueness goes, I guess the game's progression system was kind of cool. It's basically a crafting system, but presented in an interesting way. Your character can upgrade his limbs, each limb associated with an ability, and you upgrade these limbs by finding materials while out and about in the world. It's a nice coat of paint on an old system. Also, the game's areas are layered, meaning you run in and out of the back and foregrounds to traverse this world, which is a nice feature they didn't quite pull off. And I guess that's as good of a segue to criticisms as you can get, because the game's map system was pretty bad. It didn't properly represent the ins and outs of the area's layers and made navigation a hassle. So much so that I just did not want to explore this world. I missed so much content because I found this world so unpleasant and confusing to explore. I'm pretty sure I missed 2 completely optional biomes, and it wasn't just the bad map and confusing layouts that turned me off on this game. Venture to the Vile feels and plays like a cheap 2.5D game. There's just this ugliness and jank that comes with 2.5D games that I hate. Animations don't look great and combat doesn't feel impactful. Venture to the Vile is an ambitious game with lots of puzzles and optional content, but I just did not want to be in this world. Maybe it's better now as I haven't touched it since launch, but I couldn't tell you. Carrion. You are the monster, and everyone else is your prey. It's time to break out of your laboratory prison and escape into the real world where plenty more prey await. Carrion is another one of those games that's barely an MV. It technically fits all the criteria to be an MV, but it certainly doesn't feel like one. Obviously, this doesn't make it a bad game. I quite enjoyed my time with Carrion. Moving around as this massive meat, tentacles, and teeth was a lot of fun, and how you essentially float everywhere makes this a 2D side-scroller with overhead perspective controls. Aside from traversing the space as if you could float thanks to your tentacles, Carrion has a lot to offer in terms of uniqueness. Obviously, being the overpowered monster in a reverse horror game is a pretty big draw, and the biomass mechanic is also kinda neat. The monster has 3 different stages: small, medium, and large, and each stage has a plethora of abilities that can only be used in that stage, so using special pools around the map to reduce and increase your size at will makes for some interesting puzzles and combat scenarios. You can also decrease your mass by taking damage, but I wouldn't recommend it. Take too many hits, and it can end your run. When it comes to criticism, I guess I'll bring up the world. I don't know if it was a me thing, but I just could not wrap my head around Carrion's environments and map layout. Not having a map certainly didn't help. I honestly didn't know the world was interconnected and that I could revisit previous areas until the very end of the game, when you have to revisit an area to progress. Literally the only time you must backtrack in the entire game. I guess this happened for a couple of reasons. One, the game's structure is a hub world with sequestered levels you enter into, and the game guides you in such a way that you basically jump from level to level instead of exploring the hub. And 2, the game's environments all look the exact same or are extremely similar, the one biome that's in an overgrown forest notwithstanding. Between the samey locales and the strict guidance from level to level that hid the existence of a hub area, it's easy to see how this game barely feels like a Metroidvania. But if you do want to engage in backtracking, it's mostly for upgrades you don't even need. I found one optional upgrade in my playthrough that gave me an extra tentacle. Cool, but completely unnecessary, which you hate to see in a game's upgrades. The Throne. Orcs raid your castle and take over your kingdom in a single night. Now, Eder the Knight must save all the prisoners and make his way to the throne room to win back his kingdom. The Throne's an interesting game in that, had it been released 20 years ago, I bet it would have been an all-time classic. Its controls are great, you can level up by killing things, which always makes combat better and meaningful, and it has multiple weapons you can equip. It even has rare weapons as enemy drops, making this game closer to an Turkeyvania on the Metroidvania scale. Truly, The Throne is a game that I think any hardcore Metroidvania would appreciate. And the fact that it has an art style inspired by Scott Pilgrim is pretty cool too. But where the game drops the ball is in its uniqueness. It does absolutely nothing to stick out in the MV crowd, thus why I said it would have been a massive hit 20 years ago when the MV herd wasn't as thick. It really is a decent MV, but when you bring little to the table to stand out, then that's when the negative aspects of your game become more salient. That brings us to my criticisms. The game's map. Its map, at least at launch, was pretty bad. It isn't color-coded, so it's tough to remember where biomes begin and end at a glance, and there are 2 layers to the map that you can't toggle between, making navigation and route creation an absolute nightmare. Janosik 2. Janosik is a legendary outlaw who immediately gets tricked by nobility and thrown into jail. Now, he must find a way out so he can save the girl and be the hero. Janosik 2 is another game that's barely an MV thanks in large part to its level-based structure, but it has enough MV DNA with its backtracking, ability gating, and multiple endings that I'm certain MV fans will enjoy it. You might also enjoy the game's collectathon nature and its silly sense of humor. Another thing is that Janosik 2 is a much more robust game than the previous Janosik, which is freeware on Steam, so I feel the asking price is justified for what that's worth. When it comes to uniqueness, I'd say it's the swappable characters. It's nothing new in the MV scene, but it's still a lot of fun. I don't really have anything to criticize Janosik 2 on. You can love or hate its presentation and art direction, both of which I thought were fine. Its Metroidvania-ness can certainly be debated, but overall, I really thought Janosik 2 was a fun game. But I love platform-heavy collectathons with lots of false walls and stuff like that. Meowphoria. You're a game dev isekai'd into a world that needs saving from a dragon. And the power you ask for in order to save this world? The ability to create a catgirl harem. Good luck. I enjoyed my time with Meowphoria. It's goofy, it has some jank, and the dialogue and premise are not my cup of tea, but you can feel the passion and love in this game's every pixel. And the fact that there's zero lewdness is something I greatly appreciate. For uniqueness, it's definitely your cat harem. You unlock cat girls during your journey, and you can summon up to 4 at a time to help you fight. And because each cat girl comes with a different move or buff, they can really change the tide in battle. It's actually a really neat mechanic I'd love to see expanded on in future titles. It's not 100% there yet, but the blueprints have been drawn for a mechanic that I'd love to see evolve to the next level. For criticism, the English localization at launch was pretty bad, but in a so bad it's good kind of way. The Catgirl's harem's AI is a bit lacking, but again, it adds to the game's charm. Overlord, Escape from Nazarick. You play as Clementine, a warrior resurrected within the Nazarick, the stronghold of the very being who killed her. Now, Clementine must battle through the Nazarick's entire guild if she ever wants to see the light of day again. Overlord is such an odd game. It's an anime tie-in, but for a licensed game, it's not too bad. It's incredibly unmemorable because I'm having a really hard time recalling the game so I can make this entry. But I don't remember it being bad. I'd even say I had a positive experience. I just can't remember my time with it. What I do remember is that it was very platform heavy, and I thought the bosses were pretty good. As far as unique elements go, Clementine's Morning Star is pretty unforgettable. You slam it into the wall and use it to climb and swing to places. It was really cool and a lot of fun. She also gets magic that works very similarly to Deedlit's spirits from Wonder Labyrinth. Equipping the fire spell makes you immune to fire and whatnot. I also remember the spells having offensive capabilities as well as utility. I remember freezing flying enemies so I could jump on them to reach new heights. There was also a time slowing mechanic, but I remember needing to use that ability exactly once on the critical path. And I guess that brings me to my criticisms. Many of Overlord's mechanics felt half-baked or underutilized. Perhaps if I engaged in jolly old backtracking, I may have had more opportunities to use these powers, but many of the game's rewards for completing challenging sections were puzzle pieces that showed you screenshots from the anime, and that pretty much is the worst reward ever. So I elected not to participate in extracurricular exploration. Maybe my aversion to explore the Nazarick is what made this game forgettable. But then again, maybe make your rewards worth the exploration. Beyond the Ice Palace 2. You are the cursed king, usurped by your deceitful and jealous pages. Overcome by pure rage, you return to the mortal world to take back your throne and kill the god that would allow this to happen in the first place. Beyond the Ice Palace 2 is the sequel we didn't know we wanted. 37 years in the making, Beyond the Ice Palace 2 is a classicvania. Or is it a Metroidvania? There's some debate on this. Personally, I feel the game shares more DNA with Metroidvanias than classicvanias, but I can see the argument. Beyond is level structured instead of having an interconnected map, and the game's very linear. But backtracking is necessary to progress, and there's ability gating, though those gates are more story-based than exploration-based, meaning you get upgrades when you need them to progress the story, and any use of these abilities in previous areas will net you optional stuff. But the fact that you can even revisit areas with new abilities is Metroidvania coded as heck. I can't think of another classicvania that lets you revisit previous areas or even go left to revisit previous screens. When it comes to uniqueness in the MV genre, I can't really think of anything. The game does a lot of things very well combat-wise and is a lot of fun to play if you're okay with that retro action game stiffness that's prevalent in classicvania-inspired games, but just don't expect the game to tread new ground. As for criticism, I really don't have much. Platforming is a bit stiff thanks to the character's slow movements and general retro gaming philosophy, but I enjoyed the game for what it was. People criticize the game for not being a true MV, or they don't like how the game controls, which is fair, but it didn't bother me. Scarlet, City of Devils. Elovel is a city full of demons going feral, and Scarlet is a demon who just might be able to save them all. Scarlet is a surprisingly fun Metroidvania with pretty good combat. It has a witch time effect like in Bayonetta, where the game slows if you dodge at just the right time, and there's a parry mechanic in Scarlet's Fire Breath. But the shotgun is what steals the show. It comes with a triple jump, and it turns the game into an absolute cakewalk. At least it did when I played the game at launch. Scarlet is a pretty tough game with enemies that hit hard, but with a shotgun keeping them at bay, the temperature decreases rapidly. I'd say the witch time effect is Scarlet's most unique feature. You really don't see it a lot in MVs. As for my criticisms, it's tough to articulate, but I guess the overall game doesn't feel Metroidvania-y. The game's definitely a Metroidvania, but the way it's designed, it might have made for a better side-scroller with a traditional level structure. The exploration piece that makes Metroidvanias intriguing just isn't here, and environments are too samey, making exploration feel dull. I really do like Scarlet City of Devils. I've played through it twice because I enjoyed the combat, but I think the game would have been better served as a traditional, level-based experience that focused more on combat. HeroSquare. You are a square, and somewhere out there is a heart. And as a square, you really want that heart. That's the game. HeroSquare is an experimental Metroidvania in that it's an overhead MV with non-traditional platforming. You won't be jumping anywhere, but timing your slides between enemies, projectiles, and traps requires the same skills as if you were platforming. And the game emphasizes parrying as your main source of defending yourself, which is a lot of fun. I'd say HeroSquare's uniqueness comes in its parrying and puzzles. Parrying requires you to move while doing so, and your parries can be changed into different things. You can deflect projectiles or absorb them to turn yourself into a bomb. On the puzzle side of things, the game has all kinds of different puzzles, with many solutions requiring you to fit your square body into places to reveal secrets. It's oddly satisfying. When it comes to criticism, it's the backtracking. I missed a lot of puzzles my first go around because some are well hidden in the environments, and going through the biomes to find these secrets can be tedious, as the game is designed with a bunch of one-way paths that require you to dodge traps and enemies all over again. Possessors. Play as Luca, the host, and Rem, her less than cooperative demon counterpart, as they explore a quarantined city ripped apart and flooded by an interdimensional catastrophe. Their only hope of survival is by learning to coexist. Possessors is a tough one to talk about. It's a Metroidvania that has pretty good writing, good characters and scenarios, and is quite open to explore, but there's just something about the holistic experience that just doesn't hit. Its combat is fine, though I don't think it hits the highs it's attempting to achieve, and I think that comes down to lack of enemy variety. When it comes to uniqueness, I can't really think of anything Possessors does that separates it from the rest of the MV pack. I guess it's combat maybe? The charge system the game utilizes has great potential. Luca has so many charges she can use for special attacks, and those charges replenish when you use your melee strikes. This allows you to string together interesting combos with a bunch of wacky weapons like cell phones, yo-yos, and skulls. And this brings me to my criticisms. Possessors tries to be a character action game or platform fighter, but it really doesn't give players the aerial options that make those games feel fun. Moreover, character action games and platform fighters' combat make players feel empowered thanks to the over-the-top animations and combo strings. And Possessors wants you to feel anything but empowered with its choppy animations, lack of interesting combos, and the fact that you die in like 2 or 3 hits. Thankfully, you can take the game down to easy difficulty whenever you want to mitigate that last part. Another criticism I had was with Beverly, the game's lone shopkeeper who can increase your stats. Your enjoyment of Possessors hinges on how early you find her, but I hear the game's dropped an update that makes updating your stats easier, so this criticism may not hold water anymore. Record of Lodoss War, Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth. Elven warrior Deedlit awakens in a mysterious labyrinth shaped by magic and memory. Is this place real or an illusion? Will Deedlit be able to get out of this labyrinth alive? Deedlit gets compared to Symphony a lot thanks to its visuals, and it's easy to see why. The game's pixel work looks similar, and Deedlit's animations are a bit too familiar too. But once you get past the presentation, Deedlit really shares very little with Symphony, though it's still a brilliant game. There are lots of weapons to find and equip, impactful and fun spells, and its combat is pretty neat. And that's going to bring us to Deedlit's unique aspect, its spirit system. Deedlit has 2 spirits she can switch on the fly, Salamander and Sylph, or Fire and Wind, respectively. And depending on which spirit you have equipped, you get different immunities. Equip Salamander, and now you can tank fireballs and walk through lava. Equip Sylph, and now you can float and walk through tornadoes without flinching. It's a cool system that people compare to Ikaruga's polarity system because you'll need to swap spirits quickly in order to protect yourself from enemy spells. My biggest criticism for Deedlit is that it really doesn't feel like a Metroidvania. It honestly feels like a level-based game that got switched to an MV at the last moment in development. Backtracking is almost non-existent outside of finding optional stuff. I'm not saying Deedlit is a bad game, just that its Metroidvania-ness feels lacking. Batbarian, Testament of the Primordials. A barbarian and his loyal bat companion have fallen into a treacherous underground realm and must work together if they want to get back out alive. Batbarian is a puzzle platformer for masochists. Not only are the puzzles tough both in solving and in execution, thanks to needing to press all kinds of buttons in quick succession that will cramp your hands up, but you have to do all this puzzle solving in the dark. Your bat buddy is bioluminescent, and you can only see where he's shining. And if the tough puzzles don't get you, The game's sense of humor will. For such a dark game, figuratively and literally, it really likes to crack jokes. The unique element, of course, is the bat. Pip's glow is used for all kinds of puzzles, from lighting up areas to petrifying monsters, and you can throw fruit to manipulate where Pip goes. You manipulate Pip with different fruits, and you can change his elemental affinity to combat monsters or interact with the environment. Though you, as the Batbarian, can attack and affect things directly, the majority of the game will have you solving puzzles by manipulating Pip. As for my criticisms, I think the controls feel a bit slippery, and the darkness mechanic is super obnoxious. And some of the puzzles can be really hard to execute due to all the elemental shifting and choosing of fruits while platforming, as well as the precision some of these fruit tosses need to be. Thankfully, there are accessibility options to brighten up the darkness and make gameplay much easier. Metroid. Bounty hunter Samus Aran explores the hostile planet Zebes to eradicate the parasitic Metroid threat. What can I say? It's Metroid. It's legend. The blueprint that popularized the Metroidvania genre. It's tough to play today, but it's still a game I think people should try, out of respect for the genre and as an opportunity to learn and understand where the genre came from. I would definitely go into the game raw as intended. No map, no guides, no outside help whatsoever. Just give the game a shot. Maybe bust out a pencil and paper and make your own map. You'll really appreciate how far the genre has come in the last 30 years, and you might even have a little fun while you're at it. It's not a very long game, and it's way shorter if you know what you're doing. For its time, Metroid was unique. All of Metroid. Permanent power-ups, interconnected map, the isolation, the labyrinthine design, the non-linearity. I'll be the first to concede that Metroid isn't the first game with Metroidvania aspects, but there is absolutely no denying that Metroidvania refined these aspects enough to make a good game that would go on to popularize the formula. And as is the case with any avant-garde game, the genre's nascence was as bumpy as it was beautiful. Having no in-game map is really rough. The seemingly untelegraphed sections that can be bombed can lead to a lot of wasted time, and jank permeates throughout the entire planet. The worst example being how enemies can hit you during screen transitions where you can literally do nothing to defend yourself. And for us Westerners, the passcode system was terrible. And dying is also terrible. You retain all the important items you found, but you restart at the beginning of the game with only a smidge of health, forcing you to grind for health every time you die. But again, this was the beginning of the genre, so these criticisms are less about design and more about limitations of the era. Minoria. This is the fourth Witch War, and the church has had enough of all the heresy. You play as Sister Samilia, and it's your job to rescue a princess and burn every witch that blocks your way. Minoria has an interesting art direction. Environments are 2D, and character models are 3D and cel-shaded. It's a pretty nice art style. Minoria is also a tough game with enemies that do a ton of damage. Minoria's uniqueness comes in its visuals and its spell system. The spell system is kinda like an Estus Flask system from Dark Souls. You equip incenses that recharge at save points, and they can buff you, heal you, or be used for offensive magic. It's not revolutionary, but it is very quick. I guess my criticism is that the game is so forgettable. I've played through it a couple of times, and I enjoy the game, but it just doesn't do anything I haven't seen other games not only do, but do better. I think the biggest issue is how dark the game is. The game's art direction is beautiful, but hard to see and appreciate. And most of the environments are just so samey, except for the final biome, which is creative and beautiful. Minoria isn't a bad game, it's just okay with a pretty coat of paint. Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance. Dracula's castle is back, and this time you play as Just Belmont as you navigate Castlevania to take down Drac once and for all. But not before decorating your room, of course. Harmony wanted so hard to be the next Symphony of the Night. Iga and his team were brought back and they added as many bosses as the game's tiny little cartridge could fit. They even rehashed the dual castle motif from Symphony. And while stuffing all this great stuff into the game was a cool idea, so many things suffered because of it, mainly the music. It's just really difficult to recommend Juice's Adventure in this day and age. Spell Fusion was Harmony's unique contribution, and it was okay. You find and equip spell books to change how your sub-weapons act. If I recall correctly, there were 6 sub-weapons and 5 spell books, making a total of 30 different spells, each with their own animations. It was pretty ambitious for the time. As for criticism, Harmony is probably the least liked game in the Turkeyvania catalog, and for good reason. It looks bad, it sounds bad, and it plays pretty decently, to be honest. I remember playing it on GBA at launch and having to put it down because it was almost impossible to play. Without a backlight, not even the awful looking outlines around the characters helped much. Playing today on the Advanced Collection, it's really not that bad, but it's still pretty hard to look at. Midnight Castle Succubus. A succubus has moved in next door and has been abducting the village's women. It's up to you to save these girls and slay this demon. Also, there's lots of sex. Midnight Castle Succubus is a pornvania, but it comes with a safer work option if you're interested in its Metroidvania-ness, but not in its more lascivious offerings. I understand that people who like lewd games get lewd games for their lewdness, but as a legit Metroidvania, Midnight Castle Succubus isn't bad. It's very linear, the fast travel is trash, especially once you start jumping between 2 different maps, and the game goes from Simon's Quest to Mega Man at the midpoint, but it'll keep you entertained if you're looking for an MV. Beyond the lewdness, I'd say the game's midpoint twist is pretty unique. It certainly changes up the game's feel by adding new mechanics. And the party member mechanic is pretty cool too. You can find party members during your quest and equip them to help you fight, creating a conga line as you gather more members. It looks goofy, but it's a lot of fun. I could criticize the game on its lewdness, but it was designed to be a lewd game, and yet they still created an SFW option. I guess my only criticism is the fast travel in the late game. The map just doesn't track waypoints between the 2 maps very well, so it's easy to get confused as you try to jump from map to map. Sheepo. You play as the shape-shifting Sheepo, tasked with collecting eggs to preserve species for science. Sheepo is a non-combat MV with a heavy focus on speedy platforming. Kyle Thompson's debut release, Sheepo comes with that Kyle Thompson charm, full of whimsy, silly moments, and a distinctive art style. And of course, the music from Eric Thompson shines in this entry. Sheepo's a short experience, but it's a whole lot of fun if you're looking for great platforming challenge. A Metroidvania with zero combat is pretty unique, given that Metroidvanias are known for their combat. Shape-shifting into different forms with different abilities based on environmental objects is pretty unique too. Since Sheepo is such a short experience and pretty experimental for its time, I really don't have a lot of criticism for the game. Some may be disappointed in its short runtime, but that didn't bother me. The narrative and world building could have been a little stronger, but that just sounds nitpicky. The game also requires fast reaction time, but that's what I like in a platformer, so no complaints from me. Pipistrello and the Cursed Yoyo. Pepit returns home to ask his auntie for money, but before she can fork over any cash, a troop of evil entrepreneurs bust down her wall and shoot a laser to separate her soul from her body. Thankfully, a piece of her soul winds up in Pepit's yo-yo, and the two set off to retrieve the rest of her souls and to stop the corpo jerks from messing up the city. Pipistrello is a fantastic game, but not a great Metroidvania, though MV enjoyers will no doubt love this game. I know I did. It's more of a Zelda-like than a Yo-Yo-Vania, as the marketing would have you think, but I would definitely classify it as a Metroidvania. It has ability gating, an interconnected world, and it strangely has a platforming focus, despite being an overhead game. But it's clear that the game is much more of a puzzle game than an MV, and that's okay. It's still a brilliant adventure with a lot of heart and humor. As for uniqueness, the overhead perspective is uncommon in the MV scene, but it's the game's progression that takes the cake. Skills on your skill tree are essentially loaned out to you, which is cool because it lets you use the skill immediately, but until you pay off your debt, half of the money you obtain goes toward paying off that loan. Not only that, but being in debt reduces certain stats, so pretty much the entire game you'll be at a disadvantage, and that hits a little too close to home. I don't have a whole lot of criticism for Pipistrello. Though I don't think it's a strong MV, I don't really think it wanted to be. It wanted to be a puzzle platformer with fun combat and silly moves, and to that end, the game succeeds. The game could have been a stronger MV by making its world more open and by having backtracking necessary for progression, but regardless, Pipistrello is a very strong game. Gato Roboto. A small cat dons a powerful mech suit to rescue its stranded captain who got stranded all on his own without any help from the cat. Gato Roboto is a Microvania, and probably the most polished Microvania to date. You can complete the game in like 2 hours if you're taking your time, and there's just so much to like here. Its minimalistic presentation, its humor, its movement, its concept of jumping in and out of the mech to solve puzzles and overcome obstacles. The game is just a whole lot of fun. Of course, the unique element at play here is the cat versus mech dynamic, where you're afforded different moves and movements based on whether or not you're in the mech. And the game plays with this setup to create interesting set pieces and scenarios. It's tough to criticize Microvanias given that they're designed to be quick fixes, but I can't help to feel that exploration in Gato just wasn't very rewarding. Most extracurricular excursions resulted in a skin that changed the game's color, which I guess is fine, but not something I was interested in. And I'm not certain if anything has changed, but I remember how beating the game gets you stuck in the ship, so you can't run around the world after completing it, which was a bummer. Castlevania Circle of the Moon. Grab your tarot cards, whip, and delusions of taking down Dracula without a Belmont, because it's time for Circle of the Moon. The official sequel to Castlevania Symphony of the Night, but it feels almost unfair to call it that, given that its home is on a far superior piece of software and Igarashi had nothing to do with the game. Nor does it feel like an Igavania, because it is in fact not one, technically or in spirit. Circle of the Moon is its own thing, for better or for worse. If you've played Circle, then you know its unique feature, DSS, or the dual setup system. Basically, you have 2 rows of cards, and each set or pair gives Nathan a different spell, like a buff, an attack, or a summon, depending on the cards you pair up. The system is actually really cool and can break the game, if not for the game's biggest criticism, the drop rates. There's just something about Castlevania games where they give you really cool systems to play with, but they don't actually want you to play with them. The drop rates for some of these cards are diabolical. In my last playthrough, I farmed this cheetah monster for over an hour and never got the card it was supposed to drop. I guess that's a pretty extreme case, but it's not uncommon. These drop rates are trash. The level design is pretty poor as well. Lots of big areas with not a whole lot to explore or find, at least in the main castle. I will say before I move on that I hated Circle of the Moon at launch. I wanted to love this game because it was a Castlevania game, but I just couldn't. The drop rates on the cards were bad, and there's a spot where the difficulty spikes so high that you really can't move on unless you get certain card combinations or are cool with cheese strats that take forever. I think the spike comes with that 2-headed dragon, if I recall correctly. That dude sucked. Anyway, I tell you that because I replayed the game recently, and knowing what I know now, replaying it was a whole lot of fun. Circle is just one of those games that gets better on multiple playthroughs. If you hated it, maybe give it another shot. There's so much to like about it, even if it's not the best Castlevania of the bunch.